Hi, this is Matt Baney, managing editor of the Lewiston Tribune, and this is the Lewiston Tribune podcast, episode number 19. Joining me today is Eric Barker, who is the Tribune's outdoor and environmental editor. Eric, thanks for joining. How are you?
I'm good on a Friday afternoon.
Very
Yourself?
good. Oh, doing good. And Eric has an interesting story in Sunday's paper. We're going to talk about that today. The story is about a study that was recently released. It's about water supply on the Snake River should the 4 lower Snake River dams ever be breached. Did I sum it up about right?
That's about right. Okay. Correct.
And Eric, tell us about why was this study done and who did this study?
Well, the study was done by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Washington Department of Ecology. It is sort of an outgrowth of the settlement of the Salmon and Dams, the latest version of the Salmon and Dams litigation. So readers may remember in the last year, the Biden administration reached a settlement with the Nez Perce and other Columbia River tribes, the state of Oregon, and environmental groups who had sued over the latest plan that tries to balance operation of the Snake and Columbia River dams with the needs of threatened and endangered wild salmon and steelhead. So that settlement is vast. There's lots of different parts to it. It could last up to 10 years. It will last at least 5 years unless it's broken. One of the things in the settlement was that the federal government would sort of team up with Washington and others and study ways that the services provided by the dams might be replaced if the dams are breached in the future. So this is what that is about. One of the things that the dams provide is water for human use. We're talking mostly about irrigation water, but also water that's used in industrial processes and water that's used for drinking. It's provided to municipal water systems. And we have a little bit all three of those up on this end of the Snake River. City of Lewiston draws water out of the Clearwater River, but that's it's helped by the slack water creeping into the lower end of the Clearwater River. Same thing for Clearwater paper. They use quite a bit of water, and that's drawn out of the Clearwater River. And there is some irrigation, between here and Wawai or Lower Granite Dam. It's not a lot, but there is some that's drawn out of the river. And so this study looks at, okay, if the dams were to breach, the elevation of the river is going to drop 20 to 120 feet. And so how do we get that water to those people who are using it now? How do we keep that supply?
And an important distinction here, this study, it doesn't have anything to do with, it doesn't look at all at how salmon and would fare without the dams. It didn't touch on that at all.
Nope. That's other studies, and there are lots of studies that say, that would be the best thing we can do for salmon. That's why it's being proposed. It's something that perhaps could happen. It's never really come super close to clearing a hurdle of it happening, but this settlement agreement said, okay, well, if it were to happen, what were the things? What things need to be changed to keep everybody whole? And this is one of those things.
Okay, and it's it may not be something that in this debate that at least a casual person looking at the debate might think of about. Oh, yes. How do we get drinking water in the city of Lewiston? How does Clearwater paper get the water it needs? So tell us what are kind of some of the main takeaways from this study that are of interest?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is probably one of the lesser debated aspects of potential dam breaching. So one of the main takeaways of the study is that dams or no dams, there's enough water in the Snake River to sustain the ways that we are using it now, and probably for the future as well. But if you breach the dams, that water is harder to get to, and so things would have to change. So the dams, it's not only the elevation that would drop, and so it would, places where water is literally sucked out of the river would have to be altered, but also it raises the water table, and so you don't have to drill as deep for wells. Now, the study found that the vast majority of wells really won't have to be changed at all. That the river level will drop somewhere between 12 and 3 feet. 12 feet within a mile. The water table. 12 feet within a mile of the river, and then as you go further out, it's more like 3 feet. And it said most of the wells, you might sink the pump a little deeper, but a lot of wells you don't have to do anything. There are some wells that will have to be replaced. Most of those are by the Tri-Cities. Between here and the Tri-Cities, the largest use of water that is withdrawn is for irrigation, and most of that is near the Tri-Cities. Up here, as we kind of talked about, Clearwater Paper uses some water, City of Lewiston uses some water, and so there's some pretty interesting and really quite expensive alternatives that this study envisions to make sure that we still have that water. And the most expensive one is they are thinking, they're not like really proposing this, but it's just presented as, here's something that could be done. So it's not a hard proposal, we're going to do this. But anyway, they would build a storage reservoir on Hatway Creek near the Clearwater River Casino, and an accompanying pumping station that would withdraw water from the Clearwater River, put it in this storage reservoir, and then you would have something like 45 miles of pipeline that would deliver this water to various users, including Clearwater Paper, the City of Lewiston, some water users in Clarkston, all the way down to like the mouth of Alpoa Creek area, and then on the other side of the Snake River, all the way down to Wawai. Some people who withdraw it for irrigation or for animals. Anyway, so that would be a big undertaking, expensive, $1.4 billion. Another thing they could do is build a water diversion station right near the confluence, about a half mile from the confluence. That would come with 30-some miles of pipe that would deliver water to the same users. Kind of in the the Lower Monumental Little Goose pools. Mm-hmm. This study contemplates replacing the water that people kind of suck out of the river there with just wells. And then near Ice Harbor and the McNary Pool down by the Tri-Cities, where industrial agriculture uses a lot of irrigation water, they contemplate some system of diversions and pipelines to deliver the water. $950 million to $2.1 billion.
Well, so yes, interesting to read about these options, and you go on further into the story to talk about how a lot of the water diversion systems that are in place now, that were put in place after the dams were built privately, right?
That's the case around the Tri-Cities. So okay. The irrigators there, they're private wells, that irrigates private land, and they have private water rights. Those guys hate the study. The Columbia Snake River Irrigators Association, Darrell Olson down there is their representative. he says the study names like 55,000 acres of irrigated land. He says it should be 92,000. He really faults the way with how they kind of put a value on the irrigation water and the amount of siltation. The way that siltation, you breach the dams, there's a bunch of silt built up behind the dams, and that all gets flushed out. A lot of it is going to just keep on going down river over the years through various, high water events. But a great deal of it, of course, will be trapped in that in the McNary Pool, which is the next dam on the Columbia River. So he says that will be disruptive to pumping stations there that withdraw water out of that pool. So they hate it, and they don't want the Bureau of Reclamation anywhere near their stuff. What's interesting to me is they did their own study with Washington, and they don't come up with all these big, elaborate, pipelines and diversion stations. They just, each of their pumping stations, they think they can alter, and lo and behold, the price will be much cheaper. Basically, it says in the story, write us a check, $760 million. We'll take care of it.
Yes.
Feds, you stay away. Just you're doing something that's altering our, the way we operate. So you're gonna have to pay for it. But $760 million versus $950 to $2.1 billion. It's a big difference.
Oh yes. So that's one group that doesn't like what they see in this study. Who else doesn't care for this study?
I'm sure the folks, as more people become aware of this, they'll come out of the woodwork. I talked to Dan Johnson, mayor of Lewiston, and his initial take on it, he wasn't a big fan of it. One thing he said, they didn't account for what Lewiston is trying to do, which is to replace its water intake system on the Clearwater River. He didn't like the way they did some of their economic analysis. Unlike Darrell Olson, he thinks the estimates to fix things up here are underestimates instead of overestimates.
Well, those are some folks that say not so sure about this, but other groups they've looked at it and they like what they see. Could you kind of talk about some of those folks?
Yeah, so I talked to some of the environmental groups, and they like it. They acknowledge it's going to be expensive, and there'll be a lot more expenses with dam breaching if they are breached. But they point out that we spent a hell of a lot of money on salmon and steelhead recovery now, and the idea of breaching the dams is that you recover the fish and you don't have to spend that money. We've spent something like $24 billion over the decades, and it varies by year to year, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars annually we spend. So they make that argument, but the big thing that they like is that the study shows there's enough water. Like, breaching the dams doesn't affect the amount of water that comes down the Snake River each year. It just affects the elevation of the river and the ease with which water can be withdrawn. So, yes, it creates problems, but the problems are solvable.
And that's not an insignificant point. We keep hearing, like in Southern California right now, how a lack of fresh water has been a factor in the fires there. The fact that this area, this region, does seem to have enough fresh water to go around, even without dams in place, is maybe just speaking in general is a reason to appreciate living around here, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we don't have all the water in the world to waste, but we do have it now. We have a system of water rights that's gone through adjudication, and things are fairly calm now in parts of the state. Southeastern Idaho in particular, they've run into, they have water fights from time to time, groundwater versus surface water, and they just went through that in the last year. You mentioned Southern California. I think the problem there was mostly water pressure. I mean, we've had two pretty good winters of snow, and the reservoirs are generally doing well down there. Although you may have seen that President Trump is pushing to have more water diverted from the Sacramento River Delta and around the San Francisco Bay, and moving that downstream to Southern California. I can't pretend to be an expert on that, so I don't want to wade too deep there.
Right. Well, okay. It is interesting to, a study like this. It sort of gives you a bit of an image in your mind of what things could look like in a post for Lower Snake River Dam situation, I guess just looking closely here in our area, like you say, a reservoir that's out by the casino, 45 miles of pipe. Just kind of picturing that in your mind, what does that make you think of? I mean, do you see? What do you think that would just a normal person living here in town, would they notice much difference with a situation like that?
Well, the biggest thing you would notice is that the river looks a lot different.
Yeah.
It would look like a free-flowing river. Now, you could ask 100 people whether that's good or bad, and I think people's sort of idea of whether they want the dams breached or not would influence that.
Yes.
A lot of people have the experience of the 1992 drawdown that you dropped the river and exposed mud flats, and apparently didn't smell very good. But that was a very temporary thing. I mean, that land didn't have time to grow vegetation. Beaches weren't given time to reestablish. So I think the biggest difference would be the look of the place. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's sort of in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
And, it's something we can, in the future years, look at in the not too distant future. I'm forever fascinated in stories about the Klamath now, where they removed 4 really big dams, and fish are responding. What I'm interested in to see is how the former reservoir areas respond and recover and what they look like, and I think that can tell us something. So that's something to keep an eye on in the future. Well,
be sure to check out Eric's story about this study in Sunday's paper, and also he includes a link to the study. You can look at the study yourself, and if you really want to get involved, there's a public meeting that the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Washington Department of Ecology will be holding on February 5th, a Wednesday, at the Lewiston City Library from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. So anyway, interesting stuff. And Eric, you were also, earlier in the week, you were also writing about what Donald Trump's, some of his executive orders that he's issued in his first couple days back as president, how they might affect the ongoing salmon and dams situation here in our area. What were kind of the takeaways from that? What effect might some of those executive orders have here in our area?
Well, we don't. It's all what could happen. Mm-hmm. Nothing in the executive order specifically calls out the Columbia or Snake Rivers or salmon and steelhead in general. But the ones on energy are very much focused on removing burdens to energy production. And so if you look at it through that lens, there's a way to look at salmon recovery on the Snake River and on the Columbia River as being a burden to the production of hydropower. And the president's executive orders do name hydropower as one of the significant parts of the nation's energy portfolio. Interestingly enough, wind and solar are not named in that portfolio, and in fact, some of his executive orders go after wind power and wind power permitting. But such that he asked all his federal agencies to look at and identify, ways where energy production could be increased, perhaps what they say, and I think they have something like 30 to 45 days to report back. Might they mention, hey, geez, we're spilling water at Snake and Columbia River dams to help threaten and endangered wild salmon and steelhead. If we didn't do that, we could be making more power. Now, if you went there, that would disrupt a lot of the salmon recovery system that we have in place, and there would probably be lawsuits and all kinds of things to happen. One of sort of the more provocative things in his orders, the one declaring an energy emergency, envisions almost really regular meetings of the Endangered Species Committee. That's more commonly referred to as the God Squad. So it has members of his cabinet and some other folks, and they can actually kind of say, well, you know what, in this particular instance, the Endangered Species Act isn't going to apply to this species. Could that happen here? I suppose it's possible. Some of the attorneys I talked to said, well, it's not really ripe for that, because generally before you can ask the committee to excuse a federal action from the requirements of the Endangered Species Act, the federal agencies in charge of the particular fish or animal that is listed first has to say that the action in question puts that animal, that fish, in danger of extinction. Well, we haven't really got there on Snake River salmon and steelhead. Yes, the NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have said that the dams do harm salmon and steelhead, but then they say all these other things the federal government has agreed to do sort of mitigates that harm. Spilling water is one of those things. Improving habitat, way upstream in places like the South Fork of the Clearwater or various places on the Salmon River, the South Fork of the Salmon River, work done there. That's another mitigating factor. Hatchery reform, harvest reform, those are all things that mitigate the harm caused by the dams. So they ultimately, in their biological opinion, don't have a jeopardy opinion that would enable the Endangered Species Act committee to be triggered. So
okay.
That might be off the table.
Okay. And yeah, you made it pretty clear that this is all, pretty speculative right now.
Yeah.
A long ways to go, but interesting things to have in mind as you go forward.
Well, yeah, and one of the reasons I mentioned it, President Trump's sort of fixation on the system that diverts water, from Northern California to Southern California, and he keeps mistakenly calling it the Pacific Northwest, that it brings water down from the Pacific Northwest, is that everybody knows the president can become really focused on something, and so could that happen here? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there might be some groups that would really like his attention to be drawn here, and,
yes.
and others that would be very happy if he didn't gaze this direction.
Yeah, I mean, the agreement and the legal agreement in place should outlast his term, if it isn't, if one side or the other doesn't pull out. And so it could just kind of cruise along and not attract a bunch of attention. There is also, some politicians are working on various fixes. Included in that story is that Senator Jim Risch from Idaho and Representative Dan Newhouse from Central Washington have reintroduced legislation that they introduced in the last Congress as well, that would sort of take dam breaching off the table by putting the disputed 2020 biological opinion and environmental impact statement on the salmon and dams, kind of just saying that, despite all the legal maneuverings, the law says that this is good enough. That legislation didn't move last Congress with the Republicans now in charge of both chambers. Might it move? Who knows? We'll see.
The God Squad you mentioned, can you and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Can you think of, is there ever an example of them really overriding environmental species or endangered species protection?
You are putting me on the spot. I think there is. I can't come up with it right now. I don't know if it was the Tennessee Valley Authority. Listeners who might know the answer to this, forgive us for not having, but I think it has been invoked before, but it is certainly not common.
Okay. Well, Eric, thanks a lot.
I want to say one other thing. This study is not the only study of what would have to happen if the dams are breached. There's also a transportation study looking at, shipping of things like wheat on tugs and barges. There's a power study too, and most timely is there's a recreation study. So that is going on, and there's going to be a public meeting on that, I think on the 6th, so one day after this public meeting. And so readers can look to future issues of the Tribune. Probably the first Sunday in February. Perhaps I will write about that in the outdoor section.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and everybody be sure to check out Eric's stories we discussed, and his future ones. We'll have more info. And thank you for joining us for the Lewiston Tribune podcast. We'll be back next week with another topic, and we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.